Welcome, everyone. This is Danny Haiphong, and of course, this is the Left Lens. I am coming on here. I didn't know if I really wanted to do this. This is still very recent news that our dear comrade, very good friend of mine, and revolutionary journalist, activist, theoretician, I could go on, Glen Ford, has died. And I didn't know if I wanted to come on because this is still very recent news. There will be a lot more information coming in terms of, how to support the family, possibly how to support comrades and projects, including Black Agenda Report, that he founded and co-founded with Bruce Dixon, Margaret Kimberly, among others. It's a very sad day for me. To be honest, when I heard the news, I immediately broke down crying because this may not be a perspective you hear a lot because we're all very busy. We are working very hard. We are engaged in what literally is a struggle for life and a struggle of life and death, oftentimes in the things that we speak about, in the things that we talk about, and in the activity that we engage in on a day-to-day basis. So we often do not get to talk about the personal connection that we have with those that we are in this struggle with. And so I'm going to keep it on that subject and on that subject matter because it's so very important. And I'll let people come in. I'll be on for a little bit. I immediately had to take off from my day job. I just was in no shape. Most people are working right now. So to be honest, I have some time to share with you all just how much Glen Ford meant to me. I know how much he meant to the Black liberation movement, first and foremost, and to the people as a whole. He was a very accomplished person, and sometimes because of his dedication to the people, it was almost hard to imagine just how accomplished he really was and how much of a pioneer he was, especially in just Black journalism as a whole. I can't even remember all of the things that he started and formed, his deep relationships with people in the 70s and 80s, like John Conyers. And you should read his sort of obituary analysis, his rest in peace to John Conyers. It's a fascinating tale. And he talks about being on a train with him and trying to push him and say, hey, why don't you support a democratic socialist agenda in the open? And John Conyers told him, well, I wouldn't last very long now, would I? And he was always bringing that direct, concrete experience to the people to really demonstrate and expose the viciousness of this empire, the viciousness of white supremacy, racism, and capitalism. And he did it so well. And he was a mentor to me. I can tell you all how I met him. And it was really first just a digital communication. I graduated from college, had been reading Black Agenda Report for a couple of years, found it to be the only outlet that at all criticized Barack Obama. I had gotten out of experiences in student organizing against racism and labor organizing in New York City. And I noticed just how powerful the Democratic Party was over the politics of these kind of movements. And I was really looking for someone, something that could speak to my frustrations, and started to read and listen to Glen Ford's articles and commentaries along with Bruce Dixon. Even before I met them or knew them, they were already helping me. And Bruce Dixon also died in 2019. So these have been heavy losses for Black Agenda Report, of course. These are the founders of Black Agenda Report, but heavy losses for our movement and our struggle. So, I'm not going to get into anything relating to the loss. This is a very sensitive thing for the family. I am really just here to talk about my personal connection to Glen Ford, because I've been thinking about it a lot today, especially. And yeah, as I said, I met Glen Ford first just sending in an email. I was submitting my first piece, and I had no idea. I had written for my school paper, but I wasn't a writer. I had been schooled in academia. I had just done 4 years of undergraduate work, and to be honest, you don't really learn how to write in college. You kind of learn how not to write, or how to write to a particular audience, and that audience not being the people, that audience being wealthy elites and the sort of bubble that academics live in. That's how you learn to write, and you learn to second guess yourself over and over and over again. And so I remember submitting my first article to Glen Ford, and he really wanted to publish it, but it was not good work. And we just exchanged over emails what I needed to do to correct it. And perhaps the best advice as a writer that I ever received, which seems so simple and is basic writing 101, but this is how incredible of a writer he was, that he could just tell other writers and those giving submissions that you need to follow a clear path of ideas. He sent an email. It had A to an arrow to B to C, meaning idea A should follow to idea B, which should lead to idea C inside of an article. They should all connect. And that was probably the most helpful advice I had ever received up until that moment. I was at the time 23, and from then on, I was just interested in submitting because, again, Black Agenda Report was the only one of the only few. There was only a small handful that have ever done this, but as of right now, Black Agenda Report was the only one that really lasted, that consistently upheld a critique of the Obama administration, and not just a critique of its policies, but its function. We never really got that during the Obama administration's reign. The left was almost completely, if not completely, demolished and weakened and co-opted by the Obama administration, to the point where a lot of people decided it was better to defend Barack Obama as an individual than it was to really put forward an agenda for the left, for social movements. And we've seen where that got us. And we saw the destruction of Libya, for example, which Black Agenda Report was on the forefront of covering. Glen Ford himself actually went to Libya to study the country with a delegation and to report back on what NATO, in fact, had planned for the country. And we saw what NATO did. We saw that NATO destroyed the country, leveled it with thousands of sorties, and overthrew the most prosperous country on the African continent, which had a government, the Jamhuriya, which was meeting the needs of ordinary Libyans and forwarding an internationalist vision of unity for the African continent and the world. And so Libya had to be destroyed, and it was. And Glen Ford was so incredibly astute and had so much foresight to not be afraid of this really troubling phenomenon, the apex, the kind of climax of a development that Glen Ford spoke a lot about, as well as we at Black Agenda Report, the Black Misleadership class, really putting forward a vision of neocolonialism in the United States, of the black bourgeoisie in the United States, really putting a modern analysis to it, a new way of looking at it that made the most sense for the moment. That's what revolutionaries do. They explain reality so we can act on it accordingly and appropriately. And he was so incredible and so insightful when it came to this. But there's so much about Glen Ford that I could talk about. So that was just my first experience. And we, of course, we saw each other at the Left Forum most of the time, once per year. Before I got to around the same area, I moved to New York in 2017, but for about 3 years, it was just, I would see him once a year at the Left Forum. Some years I couldn't even make the Left Forum because of life issues. And a lot of our communication was digitally. A lot of it was over email. And it wasn't until I moved here that I really got to know him, you know, personally, as a comrade. I would meet up with him. Sometimes we would go to, of late, we would go to the recently opened People's Forum, talk there for hours. Hold on one second. There's actually a light like shining in my eyes, so give me a second. All right, much better. So yeah, I'm using a different light source today. Aside the space that I use generally that you've been seeing, subletted apartment, this whole thing. And the space I was using is incredibly hot all the time. So I was like, I'm not going to put myself through that with this kind of thing. So I changed up my setup a little bit, and actually I'm using a window for light, and the sun was just beaming off this metal. And anyway, so yeah, we had been meeting up, talking about things like Black Agenda Report, but he was always wanting to synthesize this particular moment, and we would have long conversations about about the future of the revolutionary struggle here, because we, you know, we're journalists, of course, at Black Agenda Report. We're writing, we're doing analysis. We're not, you know, I wouldn't say that we're like investigative reporters. Glen Ford certainly did his fair share of that over his career, but I'm mostly an analyst, and I analyze reality. I try to incorporate theory. But the reason why I'm like this is because you know, I believe at Black Agenda, we've always considered ourselves revolutionaries. We're not here to just, as a job, report the reality of things just because we want to provide a counter to the corporate media. Of course we want to do that. That is part of the function. But we are revolutionaries first and foremost. And so when Glen Ford and I would get together, you would think we would be talking about business, right? Black Agenda Report, what are we writing, that kind of thing. No, we would be talking about the grand situation, the world situation, the US situation. What are the forces at play that we need to be paying attention to? During the movement for Black Lives, that uprising, we were talking about what are the best ways to approach this? How do we do this strategically? How do we go after the nefarious forces trying to co-opt the movement? How do we try to move people in this movement in a more revolutionary direction? How do we incorporate the history, the politics, the theory into discussions, debates? How do we use spaces like these? I mean, he was one of the reason why I'm on here, even in YouTube, he was one of the most encouraging people, saying I should do this. I should start this thing up, because I had been studying how to use certain equipment, and I noticed that a lot of people were coming on here. And even though at the time he didn't necessarily have the energy to participate, he wanted this to get rolling. He wanted Black Agenda Report to have a space on here. That's the only thing I was really ever interested in. And of course, he saw it as, you know, it's your project, but it's also Black Agenda Report's project. And we're going to do, you know, we're going to hopefully all come together around this And, we're all busy people. So this has become really a labor of mine to give back and to try to get us into this space, which is since 2017 has become a really difficult space for us because of all the suppression and the censorship, the algorithms, Russiagate, all of that. But he was one of the most encouraging people to he was the most encouraging person to really push this. And so I really wouldn't, I mean, to be honest, to everyone, I wouldn't be me politically if it weren't for Glen Ford. He, as I've been saying in posts and to people, he really is and was and is my closest political mentor. And what do I mean by that? Well, I have I have someone who is very dear to me in the Somerville area, Cambridge area, where I grew up, who pushed me into politics, and I consider family. And he mentored me a lot in some ways at very difficult moments before I began to write, when I was in college, etc. But Glen Ford, after that, when I came to New York, when I started to write in 2013-14, he was really the one to mentor my writing. I really took a lot from him, not just his superior intellect, his dedication to studying history, which it seems a lot of people have forgot to do, his ability to be unafraid of what the reaction would be to a correct position, because that's what he always strived for, and his ability to not a lot of us on the left do not have enough humility. Glen Ford was a human being and had his flaws, but one of them was not humility. He could change a position. He could, and I think part of this is from he has a communist background as well. His ability to study reality and then base his politics on the material reality of the situation, not just what he wants and what he hopes for. And so if you read his work over this Black Lives Matter 2014 upsurge all the way into the Sanders phenomenon, you'll see that capacity to try to reach for young Black Americans who are becoming radicalized by this New Deal kind of social liberal, social democratic phenomenon, by Black Lives Matter, and try to reach out and expose them to what the Black liberation movement brought to the table. So, I mean, there is really no shortage of things I could talk about with you all.